Any questions, please? Don't be bashful.
I think you covered everything.
What do we get for a moment? Turn the microphone on. It's off. Turn it on.
There's some who can't get to a microphone.
How could,
I probably don't need a microphone.
how can we get from a point where we're standing in front of our icons in the morning and focusing on Christ and pouring our hearts to Him, to a point where we're able to start influencing the world around us that is 90 degrees opposite?
Did y'all hear the question?
No.
Okay, the question was, how do we get from the place where we're standing in front of our icons in the morning, pouring our hearts out to Christ, to where we can influence the world around us, which is coming at it from a 90 degrees opposite position, or 180. It's very simple, actually. It's how we treat one another. It's how we treat our coworkers. It's how we treat the people in the store that we have to go. It's how we deal with people. Do we deal honestly? Do we deal kindly? Are we patient? Are we judgmental? We're either manifesting the gospel by our lives, or we're manifesting something else by our lives. And so that's part of it. Another part of it is to evaluate everything that we do in terms of the gospel. Can I do such and such a thing? Can I make such and such a deal where so-and-so is going to get cheated and so-and-so is going to get cheated, but I'm going to really make out? Can we do that as a Christian? It's our basic attitude. That's one thing that's important. Sometimes we may be called upon to bear witness. We have to be ready to do that too. If in the workplace they say, well, we really don't want Christians around here, all those, retrograde people who believe in such ridiculous myths, like some guy who rose from the dead. You have to stand up and say, wait a second, that's wrong. If you don't think that that's out there, you're fooling yourselves. I go to a lot of campuses, college campuses, and I'll tell you a little story of my own life, and this is like 30 years ago. I went to seminary right out of college, and I hated it. and so I went back to the University of California in San Diego, where I'd been an undergraduate, and in anthropology, in psychoanalytic anthropology, and enrolled in a doctoral program. And was working on getting into the doctoral program. It was a kind of late admission thing. And one of the people who'd been one of my TAs, teaching assistants, as an undergraduate, took me aside and said, you're going to have to make a choice. Because Christians are not tolerated in this department. You have to make a choice between being a Christian and studying in this department. Now, this was California, not, not Moscow, 30 years ago. It's even worse now. It's much worse now in the secular universities. And it's an amazing thing when you get Orthodox Christian students who are standing up for the integrity of their faith within the universities. But we have to stand up and bear witness. So I went back to seminary eventually. Oh, look at what it got me. Oh, no. Please.
I just wanted to know what you did.
Yeah, I went back to seminary.
Became a metropolitan.
So, what next? And does that all make sense to you, by the way, what I was saying? Parts? Parts. What doesn't make sense?
I think the part that says that we focus on our Christian values and lead a Christian life and follow the gospel is absolutely right. And, St. Seraphim of Sarov, save yourself and thousands around you will be saved. And so one's transformed that way. I think when we extend the political dimension, we run numbers of risks. First of all, there's never been a political society that's really been a Christian society, unitary or not. There are pluses and minuses on all sides. Second of all, when we focus on the political dimension, it's often too easy to try to fix somebody else's problems or other system or something than ourselves. So, during your talk, I was thinking a lot on the Gospels and the Epistles, including the admonition in Romans 1, which were all personal admonitions. They were never state-directed admonitions. They were never directions to fix a political system. The idea was that if we save ourselves and we transform ourselves, then we will transform the world around us. And the way we witness to our fellow workers, our fellow students, or those in society is we've got to show them in our life that Christ gives us something more than they find in what society offers them. If our life isn't transformed, if we don't change, then all our rhetorics, polemics, all those things are akin to those from other organizations and other causes. And I'm very cautious about the political dimension. And I too could relate it to a story in my life. When I was on the college campus, I don't know if it was late 60s, early 70s, but somewhere right in that vintage at Cornell, going to the university chapel where they had various religions come through and talk. And this was a Protestant minister at that point, and it was in the height of the Vietnam War. And the minister stood up at the pulpit, and he said that he had more sympathy for those young men who fled to Canada than for those who died in Vietnam. I understand the church's teachings against the war. I understand a parent's grief about a loss of a child. I understand a person who flees to Canada out of personal conviction. And each seeking in their own way to do the will of God and striking with it. And I'm afraid that when a minister takes a political position, they interpose politics between God and the salvation of a soul, as opposed to talking what's right on an individual basis for your salvation and your care. And so I'm cautious about those admixtures, and I'm cautious about idealizing any society, because we're told in Princes of Men There's no salvation, whether that prince happens to be a Tsar, a commissar, or a president.
As Father Victor said, there should be dialogue. And I'm very pleased for a dialogue. And I agree with you. I agree we have to be very careful, but I think we also have to stand up to be able to maintain our freedom of action and freedom of speech in this country, which I think is gravely endangered. So we have, and I think it's really important not so much to enter into politics per se, but for the defense of our rights, as far as we can, within our society, within bounds. And ultimately, it may mean that we simply have to be martyred for them. How many tens of millions were? But we still have to stand up for what is right. Please.
Okay, sorry, this is kind of related. Okay. And I don't mean to make this heated, but I just had a conversation with one of my friends about this too. So in the Catholic Church, like the Catholics have the encyclicals, and they have a lot of social teaching that's very specific, whereas in the Orthodox Church we don't have that to the same degree. So I guess my question is, to what extent are Orthodox Christians called to participate politically for values that Orthodox people hold? Whereas, so I guess in other words, not necessarily voting for an example, like voting for a candidate who does not hold Orthodox beliefs. What are we called to do? How are our beliefs called to be manifested in political terms?
I'm very reticent to talk about voting for candidates with particular positions. I think if candidates if a candidate holds a position that's contrary to the moral teachings of the Church, then how could we possibly support him? So I think because our vote is our expression of support, for a particular candidate or for a particular position. But regarding the social teachings, the Orthodox Church does have some very specific and very powerful social teachings. One document I would strongly encourage you to take a look at is the document Millennial Statement of the Russian Orthodox Bishops on social teaching. It's in English. It's on the. It's fantastic, actually. It's probably one of the best statements I've seen coming out of the Orthodox Church anywhere in a long time, and it's very specific about our teaching on abortion, on contraception, on marriage and divorce, and all of these social issues.
State-church relations.
State and church relations. So.
Even to the extent of reserving the right, but after setting out the teachings on a number of areas in the attitude of church and state and other social questions, it says quite bluntly, if a point comes in which the state demands of any clergyman in the Russian Church that he betray the teachings of the Russian Orthodox Church or collaborate with secret agencies to violate the confidentiality teachings of the Church reserves the right to civil disobedience against the state. I think it's fairly strong.
If you go to the Moscow Patriarchate website, I think it's patriarchia.ru, and look under social teachings. There's a section, I think, pulled down what are the social teachings and documents.
It's 160 pages long.
Yeah. But you know, it's,
Yeah, but I mean, it's not like 40 topics.
yeah, but it's something well worth taking a look at.
And how recent was that?
That was 2000.
Okay.
What is it called again?
The social concept. Social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church.
It was written largely by Patriarch Kirill.
Really? Father Deacon said that it was written largely by His Holiness Patriarch Kirill. Now, there in the Orthodox Church of America, we also have quite a number of documents that have come out so far as the social teachings and things, a statement on marriage and sexuality and homosexuality, and then various and sundry other things as well. So there are documents out there. I don't know what the resources from the other jurisdictions are, but pretty much you find the Orthodox teaching pretty uniform. And the basic principle is we're uniformly pro-life, and it's very important. I'd love to see all of you out next year on January 21st for the March for Life. It was an interesting thing this year. The Roman Catholic cardinal who chairs their participation in the event, and it's vastly Roman Catholic, vastly. Of the 500,000 people that were there, you won't hear that in the media, except EWTN or something. Probably 300,000 were Roman Catholic. So they requested that the Orthodox and the Catholic bishops stand together with a single spokesman. And this year they chose me as that spokesman to give the prayer and the teaching. So we stand together with them and support them because they've taken a very great lead in trying to stand up for life, and the Orthodox Church our teaching is in absolute harmony with theirs. But we also have other things, slightly different approaches to other things. For example, to divorce. We have a slightly different teaching on contraception. Not much. We have a slightly different teaching on some other social issues. So it's worthwhile taking a look at the statement of the Russian Church, which is probably the most comprehensive. Please.
Vladika, I appreciate the debate between, what is the proper role for Orthodox Christians in the public sphere in the United States. And I was wondering if you could speak to why you think that has been the dominant, of a concentration on our own spiritual development rather than maybe a more public role. Maybe if you could speak to why that has been the historical case here, and perhaps point to some other historical examples of maybe a more opposite role for the church or for Christians.
Well, one of the things, and I'd like to build on Father John's point, there has never, ever been a truly, authentically Christian society. There have been all sorts of attempts. The Byzantine model with the unitary church state, the Russian model with the unitary church state. Usually the church ends up suffering. But that's kind of, that's the way of the cross. The church never the world is the world, and there's always going to be an opposition between the church and the world. Remember the words of our Lord: "I have overcome the world. I have overcome the world." So we're not of the world. To the extent that we allow ourselves to be defined by our passions and lusts and all this other stuff, we are of the world, and so our great task is to pull ourselves up out of that and to banish that confusion. to a great extent in America, the Orthodox Church has been very reticent to enter into the political scene. Part of that, I think, is the immigrant phenomenon. In many places in the Orthodox Church in North America, that immigrant heritage is strong, but in many places, and I would say probably for the great bulk of contemporary Orthodox Christians in America, they're second, third generation or converts. Certainly in the Orthodox Church in America, and I think probably in the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. There are, of course, new immigrants. But the immigrant, part of the immigrant phenomenon has, and how the Orthodox Church has dealt with it, is that the communities have lived in relative isolation, basically striving to build themselves up and build up one another within that, and then spiritually a focus on our own personal spiritual growth. And there is a great deal of emphasis within Orthodoxy, of course, on personal spirituality. And that really is, that's kind of how we teach about the spiritual life, I think. But there's another phenomenon, too, which I think is very important for us to realize, is that as we look at what's happening to the non-Orthodox churches, and especially to the Protestant churches, they're dying. Some of them are just dying. And they've completely given themselves over to the world. They've embraced all sorts of whatever trend happens at the time. They've embraced all sorts of immorality and validated it. And the people are leaving. They're not going anymore. Some have become Orthodox, some have become Catholic. Many became evangelical and Pentecostal for a while, and now they're becoming Catholic and Orthodox. So the role of the Orthodox Church now is evolving. And especially as we're getting over ourselves and coming together, hopefully, all the various jurisdictions coming together and bearing a common witness. Because what Orthodoxy is really about is the integrity of the teaching of the gospel, the integrity of the apostolic faith and teaching, and the maintenance and the integrity of that. And we have to stand up for that, because that's who we are. We can't be batted around by all the winds of doctrine and moral or immoral teachings that are circulating throughout the society, and which in reality have decimated most of the old traditional ecclesial institutions in this country. How many here are converts, by the way? Wow. Me too. You'll find the same thing throughout the church, irrespective of jurisdiction, actually. So we're beginning to turn outwards. And in turning out, that doesn't mean embracing the world and embrace in the negative sense. But we have to embrace everyone who comes and who is seeking the gospel in its integrity.
More questions?
Next.
Ludwig, you touched upon this briefly, but how does the holiday, the Akathist and the Mother of God at this particular point prepare us and orient us towards Easter, towards the resurrection of Christ?
I think it's very important. Well, thank you for bringing us back. When we contemplate the Mother of God, certainly, I think, as Orthodox Christians, we all have the experience of her love, of her intercession, of her presence, of her consolation. But yet, we also have to remember that when we contemplate not just the Annunciation, but the whole life of the Mother of God, we're also contemplating the resurrection from the dead. Because as Orthodox Christians, we believe that the most pure Mother of God was raised from the dead. That she died and she was sealed in the tomb, and when they opened the tomb 3 days later, she was gone. And it's the universal experience of the Church for the past 2,000 years that she's a great intercessor for us before the throne of God. And so our contemplation of her has to be a contemplation of her whole life. But you know, there was a comment that was made in seminary, which I think is very, very correct, that the Mother of God belongs to the inner life of the Church. We don't go around preaching the Mother of God. We don't go around preaching, about the Theotokos to non-Orthodox Christians. But once we have been initiated sacramentally into the life of the Church, once we're beginning to live a spiritual life, she comes and introduces herself. Right? Yeah. And so she's part of that inner experience of the Church. Because when we preach and when we bear witness to Christ, we need to bear witness to his death and resurrection. We preach Christ and him crucified and risen from the dead. But even the risen from the dead can't be understood unless somebody has already been spiritually awakened. Just like the Mother of God it doesn't make any sense to preach about her to people who have not been spiritually awakened. Because our whole experience of her, our whole understanding of who she is, her whole life is this process of her entrance deeper and deeper and deeper into the great mystery of Christ, which can only be attained through contemplation, which can only be attained through that inner spiritual ascent, through the path of purification and illumination of soul. People can say, "Oh, it's nice that you have a picture of her in the church and all that." I do have a little story. There's right across from St. Nicholas is the Vatican Embassy, where the nuncio lives, and he's got a little community of nuns who take care of him in the embassy. And they were over at St. Nicholas for a church tour one day. And they were all fascinated, beautiful frescoes and things, but they were only looking at eye level, and there's plenty to look at just at eye level. And then we've got that great big chandelier that kind of obscures things if you're in the back. And one of them turned around and said to me, "Now, do you venerate the Mother of God?" And I said, "Honey, come look." Because there she is. But she's part of that inner life of the Church, and if you look at her life, it's a way into contemplation. Think about her as a little child, and she was a child of promise, right? To Zachariah and Elizabeth, who were barren. At 3 years old, she was given to the temple and raised in the temple. What did that mean? According to the texts, that she lived in the contemplation of God. She lived completely filled with the awareness of the presence of God. When I say contemplative awareness, that's what I'm talking about. It means this being completely filled with that sense of the presence of God. In other words, constantly standing in awe before the presence, which is the highest form of prayer, by the way, according to St. Isaac and to the other fathers. And it's because of that radical purity, because you can't, it would be impossible for her to bear otherwise, that she was chosen to bear Christ. That radical purity, that complete obedience to God, that complete self-surrender, that complete self-detachment. And so she was able to bear God in her womb and to conceive God. Can you imagine? You know, most of us, when we experience God, it's for an instant, right? Just kind of a flash or a moment. So it's hard to maintain. And especially just beginning the spiritual life, those moments are moments of judgment, because it illumines all of our sins. Very difficult on one hand. On the other hand, our sins are all illumined, and yet God is waiting to receive us like a father with open arms. And so is the Mother of God, because she is a type of His grace. She bears His grace. She manifested. And so contemplate also her at the cross. And a sword shall pierce your heart also. Where even her maternal attachment had to be crucified. Think about Holy Saturday, the Matins of Holy Saturday, when we sing in the Lamentations. Towards the third ode, where the Lord speaks to her. That even in the midst of death, by her absolute, complete faithfulness, having not only her Son but her God ripped from her and crucified, tortured and crucified, she remained faithful, and thus became one of the witnesses of the resurrection. That's what we sing about when we sing the angel cried, right? That Mary, the mother of Joseph, who was James and Jesus's stepbrother, was one of the witnesses of the resurrection, and that the Lord did not allow His Holy One to see corruption, but redeemed her and raised her from the dead with the same resurrection and the same salvation that we attain. So, as we contemplate the Mother of God in her life, it's also leads us to the contemplation of our Lord Jesus Christ, who rose from the dead, who overcame death, who overcame the world, who overcame sin, and raises us up as well. So the two are intimate. Do you see how intimately the two are tied together? How we can't separate the mystery of the Mother of God from the mystery of Christ and even His death and resurrection. It's one mystery. And the best way to contemplate it is in silence. So, okay? Yes, well.
I remember in one of your sermons at St. Nicholas, you mentioned the virginity of the Mother of God being an example to us that God wants to come to that pure part in our hearts, to dwell there.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of today's gospel, where a woman raised her voice to bless the Mother of God, the passage that nursed him and the womb that gave you birth. And Christ turned it to the Mother of God as the one who received his word and kept it.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, just as what you said, her major virtue and why she became the vehicle of his incarnation. Thank you, Lord.
Anybody else? Please.
Your Holiness, would you speak to the importance of monasticism in the Orthodoxy through your own experience as a monk? I know it's a big question, but please, if you could.
The question is, can I speak to the importance of monasticism, and especially in regards to my own experience as a monk? Before they made me a bishop, I was the abbot of a monastery for 12 years, at the Monastery of St. John of Shanghai in San Francisco. And I believe monasticism is at the heart and the core of orthodoxy, and always has been. Remember, Jesus was a monk, John the Baptist was a monk, John the Apostle was a monk, Paul was a monk, James was a monk. Shall we keep going? We've got 2,000 years of... what does that mean? It doesn't simply... And that was before there was any kind of organized monasticism. And Mary was a monk. Not to forget. It was before any kind of organized monasticism. But from the very beginning of Christianity, people consecrated their virginity, consecrated themselves through chastity and obedience and non-possessiveness to the service of Christ and to Christ in order to focus themselves more and more on this inner spiritual growth and on this inner spiritual and on this personal spiritual battle. Throughout the history of the Church, from the very beginning, the monasticism has played an essential role, especially from the 3rd century, which is when it began to get organized onwards, as an organized force within the Church, and probably became its most powerful evangelical tool. And I think this has a very important lesson for the rest of us, because whether you're a monk or nun or not, when you go to a monastery and you experience being loved, being respected, being treated as a human being, it's different than the way the world treats us. And that precisely was what attracted people to monasticism. Monks historically, and this happened in Ireland with St. Patrick, this happened in Russia with St. Sergius, it happened, all over the world, that communities of monks would go out into the wilderness or out into a place, and people would gather around, and they would recognize that they're being treated in a totally different way than by their fellows. That there was something to this gospel of Jesus Christ and how it taught people to act towards one another. And so they would ask to hear the gospel, and it would be preached. But it's that living out of the gospel, especially in community. Because what the monastic communities did was that they showed a different way of life. A life according to the gospel, not according to the gratification of the flesh and the senses. A life lived focused on the worship and giving thanks to God. So monasticism is an incredibly powerful thing. Now, certainly, as all institutions, it had trials and temptations and difficulties and perversions and all sorts of other things throughout its history. But it remains at the very core of Orthodox witness and Orthodox life. My own experience of it is that it's a monasticism can reach out to people. Say, for example, the monastery that I had. The main ministry was outreach to young men. And one thing that I'll always remember is we had a thing called the Summer Novice Program, where a bunch of college boys, basically, came and were able to experience the monastic life for a summer. Either a couple weeks or a couple months, whatever they wanted. They didn't have to pay anything, they just had to work in the monastery, but they also went to services and had all the spiritual guidance they wanted and whatever. And one guy, young man, said at the end of it, he'd never been loved before. He'd never experienced being loved. It's one of the things about the breakdown of our society that's so tragic, especially with the vast number of divorces and single-parent homes and people getting caught up in their own problems, and the kids getting ignored, or the kids being shuffled off. And on and on and on and on. You all know the story. How many kids are there that don't feel like they're being loved? Or have never known love? And we think of the poor inner city kids on one hand. But you know what? From the wealthiest levels of society, often a check is a substitute, and a poor substitute. The kid may get a check, but what he really wants is a hug, and to be told that he's loved and valued. And this is one of the roles monasticism has, is to give people a sense of value, that they are worthy to be loved, that they're worthy to be respected. And it's not just monasticism, it's what our Christian communities, what our parishes should be about. That when people come to our communities, we need to welcome them with open arms and give them a sense that they are worthy of being loved and respected. Because that's not the message that the world gives to them. And if we can do that, then our witness will be transparent to Christ, to His love and to His compassion, and it will be His energy with which we love those who come to us.
The monastery is the one in Mentos?
In Manton.
Yeah, Manton, I mean, sorry.
St. John of Shanghai.
Yeah, my son is there this weekend. It's one of his favorite places to be when he's not in college. So thank you for that monastery. And my son is the one that introduced me to the term you use, logismos. because of Father Melitios Weber's book.
Mhm.
Now, when you talked about thought and the thoughts flying around, how much importance do we attach to them, and do we need to confess thoughts as sins?
Okay. One of the things, the question was, do we need to confess our thoughts as sins? How much importance should we attach to our thoughts? Usually we take ourselves way too seriously. And we think that we have all of these brilliant ideas, and all of the brilliant thoughts, or all of these horrible thoughts, and all of these brutal thoughts and memories and feelings, and think, oh, I must be a horrible person, I'm irredeemable, I'm not worthy of... And we have to get over ourselves and realize that I am not my thoughts. Our thoughts are just the way our mind processes what comes in from the environment. And it's not who I am. And so we can have the most horrendous thoughts and imaginations and images, and everything is in there that we ever saw. Think of all the sitcoms you watched as a kid. Think of all the horror movies. Think of the slasher movies, or the war movies. Think of all the other kinds of movies that and pictures and images and things that we have filled our consciences with, our consciousness with, and our subconscious. Now, one of the most important practices in monasticism is confession of thoughts. But it's not confession of thoughts as sins so much, but rather what it is, it's exposing a thought that is recurring. Sometimes like we'll get a song going around and around and around in our head, right? Or we'll have a thought going around and around.
There's even a song about that.
Around and around and around. Yeah. Well, by exposing it, you've already conquered it. And actually, most of the time it just goes away. But if you think, oh, what'll he think of me if I say that I have this thought? Oh, try and bury it, and then it keeps going around and around, and then you build up all sorts of guilt and all sorts of ideas that, oh, I must be this horrible person. I'm so and so. I'm this. I'm that. I'm that. And it's all delusion. It's all premised. And this is so important to realize that what all of these castles that we build for ourselves in our minds, all of these false identities, the false self, our egos, is delusion. It's premised. And it's only by cutting through all of that stuff, through the practice of watchfulness and the practice of inner silence, where we're able to both watch the thoughts as well as learn how to not pay attention to them, that we can be inwardly completely free. And that's the practice. I mean, that's the Philokalia in a nutshell, right there. But it's very important not to, on one hand, not to take ourselves too seriously with our thoughts, and on the other hand, it's very helpful if you can have somebody who's like on the same page as you are spiritually, to just say, oh, I've got this thought that's just bugging me to death, and that's it. And that's when, like when they say in a monastery that a novice will go to confession twice a day. It's not formal, stole over the head kind of thing. It's like, oh, I've got this thought and it's driving me nuts. Okay?
Thanks.
Okay. Well, I thank you very much. I hope this was somewhat useful. And I ask your prayers. And look forward to seeing you all again soon, either here or at St. Nicholas or around. And Father Victor, I'm profoundly grateful. And also want to remind people that this lecture is, this event is in memory of His Grace Bishop Basil Verdzianko, who is obviously greatly beloved here. And my great hope to see his memory, shall we say, increased, and his commemoration increased throughout our church. So, the Lord bless you.
There's a message for you that came from Abbess Emiliani. She says, we have 40 people in the monastery and unfortunately cannot come. My respects to His Beatitude, and to Walter Jonah and Father Victor. Abbess Emiliani.
Well, God bless you.
Vladika, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and coming to serve with us and doing this retreat. And frankly, I hope this becomes an annual event, either here or St. Nicholas, but I strongly urge everyone to attend these retreats. I think they're very, very helpful. And they're helpful, first and foremost, liturgically, that we come together and pray and receive of one cup, and of course to hear the wisdom that Vladika has accumulated over his career as a monastic and a hierarch of the Orthodox Church. Thank you, Vladika. We're profoundly grateful to you. Thank you very much. Say a prayer.
Достойно и всякого истину, блажите Тя, Богородицу, пресноблаженную и пренепорочную, и Матерь Бога нашего, честнейшую Херувим, и славнейшую без сравнения Серафим, без истения Бога Слова родшую, сущую Богородицу Тя величаем, исполняйте Господа.
God bless you.